My name's Tony Bailey, and I'm product marketing at Illumio, and I'm going to spend the next 15-20 minutes talking about zero trust segmentation in the cloud. From the Illumio perspective, we think about segmentation or zero trust segmentation in kind of three main areas. One is having full visibility into the workloads that you have in your cloud, on-premises data centers, and with your endpoints. The second one is by having that visibility, you can then apply proactive segmentation controls to that traffic that's taking place between those workloads. Then the third one is by having those first two things, when somebody gets into your environment and a data breach is potentially occurring, you can quickly contain attacks by shutting down any untrusted communications. So when we talk to security leaders, here's a few things that they tell us, amongst other things. One is lack of visibility into the connectivity between their applications and workloads is definitely a big concern to them, particularly in the cloud where things constantly spin up and spin down. Having that visibility gives them really strong insights into what's taking place in their cloud. The second one that's of concern to security leaders is it's hard to proactively apply segmentation controls if they don't have that visibility in their environments. Then the third one is, let's assume breaches take place, and so being able to reduce the level of impact when a breach does occur, and by shutting down any untrusted communications to quickly contain an attack is of other concerns to security leaders. So let's sort of dig into some of these concerns and some of these elements of cloud security. The first one, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, is look, in the cloud, things constantly change. Workloads constantly spin up and spin down, yet you could argue that threats are constant. And whether attackers are, if they're not sophisticated, they're certainly relentless. And they're going to try every trick in the book to try and get at your data. What makes it even more complicated is many organizations aren't necessarily born in the cloud. They have other environments outside of, say, AWS. They may have on-premises data centers, and they certainly may have endpoints with their users, such as PCs and Macs, that are communicating with those workloads. So it does get a little bit complicated. As a result of those different environments, you can imagine attackers have certainly got different ways that once they get into an environment, they can move laterally around that environment. And this is kind of illustrating whether it's number one is a server-to-server based spread, moving around that way. The other one could be an endpoint breach spread, so something gets infected on a laptop and it kind of moves around from that standpoint. It could even be something spreading from, say, an OT device, an operational technology device. Let's imagine something running with an embedded OS that's controlling some industrial system, and somehow, some way, something gets in through that path, or something is able to control that device by getting in through an endpoint, and attackers leveraging that traffic to get into the OT. So certainly, attackers, as I mentioned, are going to try every trick in the book. So if you think about breach containment, this notion, maybe 20 years ago, we focused an awful lot on prevention, whether it was leveraging firewalls and port blocking, protocol blocking, doing those kinds of things, and it was sort of keep the bad people out at all costs. Then we kind of evolved maybe 10 years ago or so, where it was, prevention's important, but also we need to have a little bit more intelligence around this. And so maybe we need some detection and response capabilities. So you see those solutions appearing as well. And those first two, they play a part, but by any means in cloud security. But more recently, at least from Illumio's standpoint, and I think some areas of the industry, containment is also critical. It's almost like surviving the inevitable look, we know we're going to be breached eventually, so let's make sure we've got a plan in place and a segmentation solution in place to stop those communications as an attacker moves around laterally. So that's this notion most recently of containment being a new paradigm around breaches. So digging back into that area that I started off with, which is around visibility. Well, guess what? You can't enforce what you can't see. So it would be awful nice if you had full visibility into all of your workloads in your environments and the traffic that's taking place between those workloads. That allows you to start to think about what do we need to enforce and what can we enforce. The second one is showing, and this animates over to an animation showing some of the traffic flows. The second one is this idea of you can't enforce what you can't see in terms of the environments. So you may have a development environment and a production environment. And having visibility into those two and the traffic flows between them also is of super critical nature. Imagine you may have something that's currently in development and you're trying to figure out why is that application communicating to something in production? That shouldn't be happening. So I need to be able to enforce, have visibility into that so I can enforce, control those communications. And then it gets yet more tricky where you introduce this idea of, well, it's not just a cloud environment, it's also on-premises data center where I've got workloads running there. But I've also have my endpoints where I have my users on their PCs and Macs. They're also communicating with these workloads. So having all of these dependencies in terms of traffic, but not the visibility into those dependencies, makes it a challenge. So if you think about ways that we can sort of approach this, the first one is sort of illustrating this idea of detection and repair tools. And they certainly play a really important part. Think about the things of identifying, going out and scanning and identifying known vulnerabilities and then fixing the code to address that vulnerability, thereby reducing the chance of an exploit. Or something maybe misconfigured. Going out, scanning for misconfigurations, so doing the detection and repair of misconfigurations. Or think of having a really strong backstop on top of those first things. And that's where zero trust segmentation starts to kick into high gear. It is the backdrop to be able to contain attacks. And so it can actually show you the visibility of all your communications, which is what I was referring to earlier, but also pushing out policies to control those communications, whether it's by port number, by protocol type, definitely being able to do that. The great thing about that is once you've contained an attack, it kind of gives you the leeway to kind of figure out, oh, okay, what happened here or what is happening here? So it gives you some breathing room to do things like digital forensics, to try and figure out, getting to the bottom of what happened. Was this attack the result of some really fancy malware that loaded up into memory, boot up on an endpoint, or it's maybe something a bit more basic, maybe it's an email attachment with some malware attached. That's how the attacker got into the environment. So definitely by containing, it does give you that breathing room. So let's dig in a little further. So let's talk about specifically Illumio Cloud Secure for public cloud applications and workloads running in environments like AWS. So the first thing we do is on the left-hand side, we're going to collect flow telemetry data. So we're going to leverage VPC flow logs, and we're going to bring in all of that information into Illumio. So now we're starting to gather this rich traffic that's taking place, but also you need context. It's all in well having a nice map that shows this IP address is talking to that IP address, but I really don't know what that is. So we also bring in object metadata, and you can apply your own labels to that map as well. So now you start to get a picture, as we're illustrating on the right-hand side, which is, oh, I've got my applications running in EC2, and it's communicating to my database. I've got the full context of knowing what is happening there. And that's really what this next slide is illustrating, being able to map applications to resources. So I can actually see an application deployment. I can see application X running in EC2, communicating with database Y within our visualization. Having those things in place means I can now have some kind of proactive segmentation and policies put in place. So I'm visualizing and I can say, yeah, why is that Lambda function talking to that database? That shouldn't be happening. Let me author and publish a policy just to shut that thing down. And then, again, give me some breathing room to find out what's going on. And I can push out those policies out to the SGs in AWS. And actually, as I mentioned earlier, is because Illumio is not just working in the public cloud environments, but also on-premises data center and endpoints. And so we can have a consistent policy across all of those environments, no matter what is communicating with what and where from what. So as we start to summarize here, when you think about zero trust segmentation and Illumio, the first thing we're doing is we are providing a map of traffic flow telemetry with contextual labels applied to that visualization. Again, it's not a head scratcher of IP address 1, talking to IP address 2, and not really knowing what that is. We give you that context because we're bringing in object metadata from AWS. Those insights into the traffic flow now help you start to write proactive segmentation policies and author those policies and then push out those policies out to the security groups in AWS. In the case of public cloud, so that if an attack is underway, you can quickly contain those attacks because you see the traffic flow taking place. And again, to the earlier example is, yikes, that traffic flow looks highly irregular. I think I'm just going to push out a policy just to shut that down for the time being while I do further investigation, or I stop an active attack and lateral movement. So as I start to finish up here, so Illumio, based in the Bay Area, we're about 600 employees, and we've engaged with many organizations, and you can see a few logos here. So these companies are leveraging us for zero trust segmentation for their on-premise data center, their public cloud infrastructures, and for their endpoints. So we've got some fairly strong evidence with those organizations. And we're helping them, whether it's things like containing ransomware attacks or making sure they've got a strong, proactive segmentation policy and full visibility into their environments in place. For the example of Cloud Secure that I gave you for public cloud environments, one thing I didn't mention is that Cloud Secure is an agentless approach, because all we're doing is we're leveraging the native tools, for example, in AWS. So whether it's the VPC flow logs that are already there, whether it's Resource Explorer that's already there, to bring in that information around traffic flows and object metadata. So there's no agent required. We're just using the native tools that are already there. You can get started today, therefore, with an agentless approach. Go to this URL, get up and running. It's a simple process of leveraging your cloud accounts to get in there, build out the visibility of all your workloads. And that's it. Took me about 15 minutes, pretty good going. So again, Tony Bailey, you can email me if you have any questions. Thank you very much.